Years ago, Utah created a law designed to make our roads safer against repeat drunk drivers.
But our investigation has found the law is not being enforced. And Bill Gephardt says drunks can now get back on the road without the safeguards that have been designed by the law.
Yeah, the law is kind of lenient compared to even laws in some other states. But here is what the law requires. Any twice convicted drunk driver must use a breathalyzer interlock device like this. Before starting the car, the driver must blow into this device. If the interlock detects alcohol, the car will not start. But we found a combination of the confusion in the charts, the courts, that is, the Utah Driver's License Division, and the convicted drunk drivers themselves have allowed the law to be ignored. In order for Wesley Simmons to start his car, he has to use this breathalyzer. You see, in October of 2006, he was convicted for a second time of driving under the influence. And he was subject to this law. Anyone with 2 or more DUI convictions must have the ignition interlock in their car. But Simmons says he had no idea.
The second judge didn't say anything about interlock.
Wesley says he found out the hard way when a police officer pulled him over for expired plates. Then the surprise.
Went through the law, said that you're supposed to have this device. And I says, I just came from the Driver's License Division. They didn't tell me that.
Wesley says when the officer looked up his driver license information, he found out Wesley was required to have an interlock device.
At that point, it was just completely news to me.
The result, Wesley says police would not allow him to drive his car. He arranged to have an interlock device installed the next day. The law says when Utah judges sentence drunk drivers, they're supposed to tell second-timers that they have to have an interlock device. But we found that doesn't always happen.
That's the biggest loophole that we're seeing.
CHRISTINA BARRERA works for a company which sells the interlock devices, and she says when she gets the call from drivers like Wesley, the story is often the same.
Unfortunately, the problem has been that there is no enforcement of this. So people are getting licensed back who are interlock restricted, who do not have an interlock on their vehicles.
Now, the Driver License Division gets all that conviction information from the courts, and they pass along which drivers must have interlock devices to all the Utah police agencies. Police officers see it on their computer screens when nobody by law has to tell Wesley. Wesley says a judge never told him, and he says when he asked the Driver License Division if he was required to have a device, they told him no.
I had actually talked to the supervisor, and he says it's not their job. They don't have to verbally tell you, even if you ask.
There isn't a requirement by law that we notify a person of...
Kim Gibbs with the Driver License Division says telling is optional.
We certainly don't want to put people in a position where they're out driving around and have no knowledge of a restriction on their license, and then they get pulled over and get cited for it.
But that's exactly what happened to Wesley. And our investigation found, in fact, more than 5,200 Utah drivers are currently required to have the ignition interlocks. But only 1,500 devices are even available in Utah, say the companies which provide the devices.
But the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, the judges, all of them should be informing this offender that they need to have this installed.
Senator CARLENE Walker introduced the ignition interlock bill that passed in 2006, and she says maybe it's time to review implementation.
Somehow the ball, I guess, is being dropped, and some people are getting through the cracks. We will be looking into that and finding out exactly why that's happening and try and figure out a course of action to close that gap.
Closing the gap could help prevent reoffenders because research shows pairing an interlock device with alcohol education helps prevent drinking and driving. And Wesley says it's made him think twice before getting behind the wheel.
It definitely keeps me in line. Obviously I've had a problem with this.
You know, there is a letter that the Driver License Division sends to offenders, but it is often forgotten by the time a second-time offender gets the license back, which can be 3 months to 2 years later. And it all boils down to nobody by law must tell an offender that they have to have an interlock. If you have something you think I need to investigate, the number is 973-3122, or my email address, Gephardt@KUTV2.com.